My dear friend, I hope all is well with you wherever you are, and I hope God is keeping his hand of protection over your family. In Colossians chapter 1, reading verse 16, the Bible tells us, "For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him." All things God created were designed for his glory and for his purposes, whether he makes those purposes known to mankind or not. We have just read that God created thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. Those four words refer to systems of government, authority, and rulership, one person having power over another. This originated with God. He created that system. Let me repeat. God created a system in which someone has power over someone else. God never created abuse of power. He created power, and he entrusted it to earthly beings. Having said that, let us go to Daniel chapter 2 and read verse 21. "And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings." If you combine Daniel 2:21 with Colossians 1:16, it's very clear that God not only originated the concept of power, one person having authority over another, but it is God who ultimately decides who will exercise that authority and for how long. We listen now to Acts 17, reading verse 26. "And hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of the habitation." It is God that gives power to various nations. It is God that decides what part of the earth they'll inhabit and for how long. Now, listen to Romans 13, reading from verse 1. "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God." Now listen to God's amazing grace, page 59, paragraph 5. "We are to recognize human government as an ordinance of divine appointment and teach obedience to it as a sacred duty within its legitimate sphere." The legitimate sphere is the secular matters. No government can tell me who to worship and who not to worship. But we are to recognize the very system of human government as something divinely appointed. Now you may say, what does that have to do with the Sabbath? It has a lot to do with the Sabbath. If the Sabbath is a celebration of the Creator's power in the work of creation, we just discovered from Colossians 1:16 that among God's created works was the system of power, thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. If there's a ruler in your country, that was arranged and allowed by God. And so the Sabbath reminds us that the Creator has ultimate control over all the nations of the earth, and he controls them for his glory and for his purposes, some of which he does not reveal to us. We simply have to trust God. Which means the genuine child of God must be very careful how he or she protests a government, because all governments, good or bad, are allowed by God. I must say again, God did not originate the system of abuse of power. He originated the system of one person having authority over another, one nation having authority for a certain set of time. Then he moves that nation off the scene, brings in another for reasons known to him. The child of God must be careful not to follow the established practice of the world, which is to protest and riot anytime something happens that the general population does not like. If we trust our Creator, the only question we need to ask is, am I faithful to God? Not who is in power, not who is ruling, not who's wielding the scepter, but am I faithful to God? If the kingdom of Judah had been faithful to God, they would never have been conquered by Babylon. They were conquered by Babylon, you can read this in Jeremiah 17:19-26, because they violated his law. Let me repeat, the critical question for you and for me, my listening friend, isn't which government is in power. The question is, am I faithful to God? Am I on the right side of the one who controls the nations of this earth? My dear friend, as you keep the Sabbath holy, remember the Creator did not only create fish and birds and trees and the sun and the moon. He also created the system of power. One person exercising power over another. It was He who arranged what nation would inhabit where and for how long. All for His purposes. And it is God that determines His purposes. We do not. As you keep the Sabbath holy, keep this thought in mind. Let me be right with my God. And if I am right with my God, I need not fear who is in power, because my God, who's on my side and whose side I am on, will take care of me through thick and thin. My listening friend, may the Lord bless you as you enjoy the peace of mind of knowing that your God, the Creator who created the system of power and authority and government, He will watch over you. He'll protect you. He'll sustain you regardless of who is in power if you are right with Him. And the only way to be right with God is to obey Him. And since these audios target the Sabbath, I urge you, the Creator of power and systems of government is the one who said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. May God bless you as you keep the Sabbath holy.